everybody has to have their own sort of way of working, and you can't prescribe your way on somebody else. But I think there's probably three things in my own life that I always think about, which is commitment, recovery, and then expectations. Why I say those three is because commitment is one where you have to be able to always give your best. Recovery is the second one, which is being able to do that is something which I would recommend to sort of young listeners, because if you dwell on things and they just bring you further and further into something, you're only going to move in that direction. Whereas if you can just figure out how to cope and create a mechanism for yourself to be able to do it, I think that that's really important. And then the third is expectations, which is we're all different and we all have different skills. I think that you can't expect somebody else to do something the way that you do it. And I think it's about being able to be flexible to find what they're good at, as well as finding how you can then work with them to complement them.
Welcome to this week's As Unexpected podcast, when we talk to C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists about how they lead into the future when the future generally goes as unexpected. I'm Scott Marshall, your host, and my own professional experience has made me a believer that it's not how you show up when all goes as planned, but it is how you show up when things go as unplanned. Given all of their experiences, each of our guests has become very attuned to the fact that the future is not to be predicted. My hope is that this podcast can help all of you become better leaders by building the core leadership capabilities for leading in an uncertain world. Hey listeners, welcome to another episode of the As Unexpected podcast. I'm your host, Scott Marshall, and I have really been looking forward to this guest. What a fascinating background. What a fascinating position he holds now. And I think you're just deeply going to enjoy the stories that Taylor has to share. Taylor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
It's awesome to have you here.
Thank you.
And if you don't mind starting off, can you give our listeners a sense of your background and then finish off with what your current role is?
Sure. It's my pleasure, and it's great to be here. As I said to you before, Semester at Sea means a lot to me, and I think it's kind of an interesting place to start at from sort of the break off of what could have been my life in a very unexpected journey to get to where I am today. I studied in Boston. I'm from New York, hadn't really left America until junior year when I studied abroad for the first time. And then a friend of mine from camp, who I hadn't spoken to in about 20 years, got back in touch and said, I did this great study abroad program called Semester at Sea, which I had never heard of. And that kind of was a moment where I said, oh, okay, I'll park that in the back of my mind. Fast forward a year, I had been offered a job which kind of said, we're not really ready for you to join. We need another 6 months. And I had a moment in life, which was my first kind of moment to sit back and say, how do I make the most of this moment after, going through college and just trying to grind away to get to your dream job of maybe being a banker or maybe living in the city or whatever you thought the dream was. And so I took Semester at Sea, and I think that opened up my eyes to really what the world could be. And so after that, I kind of used the first job that I had as an opportunity to get global exposure. I was with a bank, and I had the opportunity with the bank to rotate to multiple countries, including London and Paris and Johannesburg. And eventually the bank asked me, where do you want to be? And I said, I'd actually like to continue the journey into more emerging markets, into the Middle East, and live in the UAE, which in 2006 was not kind of Dubai that you know today. It was very much in that process of establishing itself. And so I think just because the bank that I was working at had a kind of good reputation in that market, I said, let's give that a try and hopefully see how that goes. And so I think from that, it kind of led me to the next path, let's say, which was this chapter, which I'm now in, which is a love affair with this region, which I have no personal connections to, outside of just being kind of enjoying the fact that they're growing and they're positive and they're looking at the future very, very differently than other parts of the world. So I've kind of ping-ponged back and forth here on 3 different occasions. First, I stayed in finance, and then after the financial crisis in sort of 2009, I had a chance to look back at my life again and say, well, what am I truly passionate about? And sports has always been at the top of my sort of personal identity, I would say. And I started to try and apply for business school. And I said, you know what, I'm going to write these applications as if I'm going to go work in sports, because I don't want to work in, let's say, traditional finance anymore. Like, I want to go and explore my passion. And lo and behold, was kind of struggling with that process, and found, fortunately or fortuitously, a relationship with someone who got me a unpaid internship to move to China on my own, and take an opportunity with AEG, which is one of the largest sports and entertainment companies in the world. And within a few months, they saw my background, which was quite different from the kind of people who typically were working in sort of the business at that time. And it was just a good fit. And they offered me a full-time job. So I was able to almost create my second career at that moment, to move from what I was doing to now something which was what I wanted to be doing. And I think over the past 10 years after that, I worked in sports and entertainment from an operating capacity, organizing some of the biggest moments in the world, like the first ever Mass of the Pope in the Middle East, the first ever Rolling Stones concert in the Middle East, the first ever NBA game in India, the first ever big event in Saudi Arabia. And so all these things kind of were just incredible experiences along the way. And then I think along this journey, moving back and forth from China to then the Middle East to Singapore, and now getting the opportunity to come back to the Middle East about 4 years ago to join the Public Investment Fund and help them establish their sports and entertainment sector. It was something which just felt like the right moment, where everything was kind of coming together in my own experiences, to hopefully uplift what I see being a huge opportunity for cultural awareness on a global level.
Love that introduction, because there's just so many pieces in there. I want to go back, excuse me, a little bit. You had built a foundation in finance and in business and banking, so you had that foundation. And then you said you took an unpaid internship to take you to China. There's so much to learn from that. Your core passion you had identified, and you knew you had to pursue that to be fulfilled. And you stayed on the business side, so that original foundation of finance clearly supported you in doing that work. Is that accurate?
You know, it's interesting. I was probably a little bit blindsided and jaded when I was younger, in the sense that you see the gravy train and you feel it's going to continue forever. And so, living in the Middle East, you kind of have this like saying here, where you're trying to keep up with the next guy, because there's a lot of this kind of showmanship and bravado that happens, and that's not just here in this region, but it's actually global, with how, as a 20-year-old in a kind of fast-paced city, you want to continue to be sort of doing things which are kind of staying relevant to your kind of friend base. And so I ended up probably spending most of my money in that period of my life, which so not really having financial control, which I don't look back on negatively. Like, I traveled extensively, and the beauty of being outside of America and having the chance to kind of be connected to the world, you can kind of take a weekend trip to North Africa, or take a sort of long week in Eastern Europe. Like, there are so many opportunities which you can spend money on and get quality experiences in life. And so for me, when I went back, what happened was the company I was working for was part of the Dubai government. It was a sovereign wealth fund at the time. And I was one of the last people to join the fund. And obviously, when the financial crisis happened, there were challenges with the economy globally. They were kind enough to help me to transition back to America for a period of 2 years and give me the chance to land on my feet. And I think the reason I say that is because landing on my feet didn't mean I had enough kind of funds to kind of sustain myself for the long term in China. Like, I wasn't going to kind of be able to be an unpaid kind of employee for the rest of my life. But I just had enough self kind of worth to say that I'll be able to find my way to the next thing. Now, it's funny, what they paid me in was Chinese lessons. And the unfortunate part is I'm terrible with languages, so I wasn't able to work on that. But that was where it started, and then they did eventually pay me. So this is not a slight on AG. I love the company and I love the people there. So it
Yeah.
was not too long after that I had proven my worth to the leadership.
Yeah. And you were following your passion. You knew you wanted to get into sports and entertainment, and you took the jump, having the confidence that you'll find your way, which I think is a terrific lesson for anybody young in their career who feels, as you said, I got to follow that standard path. I got to get the foundations, and create a base of experience and wealth. But at some point, you find that maybe that's not connecting to your deepest passions. As valued, I would assume that the foundation of understanding banking and financing and sovereign wealth has still served you well. But now you get to exercise that within a world that you just love.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think foundations are critical. And it's funny because working in different industries, which sometimes people stay in the same kind of career path, you start to see where there are strengths and weaknesses of different types of employees in the world. And I've worked in different types of roles as well, like from business development to strategy to kind of marketing, fan engagement, to even seeing some of the commercial elements of the business. And everybody has different personalities, and I think everybody finds the right path for what their skill set is. I think one, being flexible is really important. Like, don't try to just be a salesperson because that's where you're going to make the most money, or don't try to put yourself in the path where you think you're going to kind of grow quickest. Because if you try to cut corners and you don't have those foundations, you actually will get exposed at some point. And it's something which I find to be true often, where people are so ambitious coming out of whatever programs they're part of in the world, because we're put on a path to succeed, that if you miss a step of understanding what it means to like have the tangible skill set, you may need that at some point. It's like having a toolkit or an arsenal. And I think that in my life, I find that taking things out of my arsenal and toolkit is actually really valuable, because it gives me the chance to like use different pieces of what I've learned along the way. And you just kind of have to have a good memory not to lose track of these things.
This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program for college students and adults on career breaks, sabbaticals, or retired, interested in learning and exploring the world together. Learn more about the Lifelong Learner program at www.semesteratSea.org. Yeah. So I want to build off two things that you've just brought up. One, you said being flexible, adaptable, and also having that foundation, that toolkit. So those seem, when they brought together, really tying into the theme of this podcast, as unexpected, when things go as unexpected. So you got to be flexible, but you also have to have an anchor. Taylor, do you mind sharing with our guests, with our listeners, a few of the stories that we talked about earlier about how things went as unexpected for you and how you did end up showing up for yourself and for those around you? I know you have some great stories to share.
Yeah, no, it would be my pleasure. So I think I'll start with a personal anecdote and then talk about a professional one. I think on the personal side, you make hard choices in life. And it's interesting because to live a life where you've grown up in a city, or you've grown up at least close to your loved ones, whether that be friends or family, like that's kind of path one, let's say. And then there's the more untrodden path, which is just kind of going at it on your own and trying to figure out your own way and leaving behind those safety nets to sort of explore. And I definitely took that latter path in terms of my own life. And it took me probably about, I'd say maybe 15 or 20 years until I found like someone who I could then share that path with, which is, again, sometimes can be lonely in the sense of having to do things on your own and trying to figure out how to take the most out of what you're doing, but not like feeling like you have someone to share with, because what's good for you is not always good for the other person who you love. And so I think the first kind of unexpected, like say, path and decision that I had to take was I was living in Singapore and I was working back at AEG, which, again, as I explained before, is a company that I admire greatly. And the people there are some of the closest in my life because of the fact that I've worked with them back and forth on many different occasions. And I was presented this opportunity to join where I am right now. And that decision of having to choose between something that is comfortable and safe, and then versus something which could be quite transformational in your life, is a big step. But then you layer over that kind of love and that feeling towards someone else who you have to bring into that as another part of the equation. That's where it gets really unexpected. And I think being in a relationship and trying to figure out how to manage that as another variable was definitely something that I had to kind of agree as a partnership and a pair. And this was during COVID. So there was a decision where in Singapore, you're locked down, you couldn't actually get off the island. And we ended up taking the decision that I would take the job. And I think it was probably about 9 or 10 months until we really saw each other for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that was a big thing. But we spoke every day on the phone. It was almost like being in lockdown, but just living in different countries. So I think that was pretty unexpected. And then from a professional side, I'd say an unexpected experience was some of what I was talking about earlier with it, which is how to open up new cultural experiences through sports and entertainment to the world. And I think that that's really unexpected because seeing people's reaction is very priceless. Like, I think one of the things that people don't do in concerts and sports events is take the time to turn around and see the faces of the people who are being inspired by the people that inspire us. And so I think I'll always remember some of my first events. You're like a child, like because you're doing what you've dreamt of. So I was maybe side stage at a Maroon 5 concert, or we brought LeBron James to China for his first ever game there. And seeing that sort of from the perspective of having helped to deliver that, it's very special. But maybe one anecdote in particular that I'm very fond of is growing up, I was a very big WWF at the time, now WWE fan. And I'd watch with my dad and my grandparents and enjoy the soap opera drama that is the wrestling industry. And when I was in Abu Dhabi organizing events for the government of Abu Dhabi, we had the opportunity to work with a really inspiring Saudi woman who in 2013 at the time, as probably your listeners may or may not know, Saudi Arabia was still going through the early stages of the transformation that it's going through right now. And it was still a little bit more restrictive than what it is today. However, in that instance, we were asked to help to find a piece of content that could help create the first ever Western event in the country. Now, that's a pretty big statement because, like, just recently my boss from AEG just put on Ed Sheeran in Bhutan, and that was the first time they had that concert. Or he did the first ever Rolling Stones concert in Cuba. So to be part of these moments where you can say that you've helped to be part of changing a nation's identity through these great moments where people are so happy to be part of them, and also to have an affinity for the product, in that case, WWE, it was really special. And what was unexpected about that experience for me was we arrived, and at the time, Saudi Arabia had a rule about allowing men and women to be at the same event. And in that instance, it was a men-only event. However, there were so many passionate women who wanted to experience this that they came to the hotel and they greeted the wrestlers, and it felt like they were bigger superstars than the Beatles coming to let's say Shea Stadium to do their first concert. So it was a very special experience and something I think that has charted the way to where the country is now, where they're kind of on everybody's lips as people think about what's happening in sports and entertainment.
No doubt. And now, of course, Saudi Arabia is going to be hosting the 2034 FIFA World Cup, which is probably 10 years ago, not something that that country or maybe the world would have expected, but the progress has been so significant that this is something that will be realized in less than a decade. That's quite phenomenal.
Yeah, I think that's the amazing thing about sports is it gives you the chance to showcase yourself, and I think that that's something which is what Saudi Arabia is ultimately trying to achieve with that. And again, this is from my perspective, sitting outside of that event, but um, I think the ability to have something that has so many people from so many different countries all congregate into a special experience, and I've traveled to World Cups as a fan with friends, like it's part of our kind of ritual to kind of experience these things from time to time, not from a business perspective. And I think the ability to bring people into an experience is what these big moments allow for. And I think Qatar did it actually really well with the way that they delivered their World Cup. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Qatar, but it's a very small island,
Yep,
and they
I've
have
been there.
every stadium within a 30 or 45-minute drive of each other. And so what that allowed for is basically the world to basically descend on this location and then experience something which you would never be able to experience. Like in America, when they have the World Cup, they'll have a game in LA one day and then they'll have exactly back and forth ping ponging. And so you'll be lucky if you can get a ticket for maybe one group stage game. Whereas that moment in Qatar, and I think what will happen in Saudi is because everything is going to be centralized, that's going to provide you the opportunity to go and see things which you probably would never see. And so that allows you to experience culture, which you'd probably never be able to experience. Because you might go to the US game, but that doesn't mean you'll get to see like Cameroon versus Japan. And I think one of the unique things about sport is actually seeing how the fans interact. Like in football, when you host a Japanese team, and I've had the pleasure of doing it during FIFA Club World Cups. The Japanese fans are sit there and are as passionate as any fan in the world for the 45 minutes of play. And then it's almost like they have a off switch where they basically relax and take it easy for the halftime. Then they ramp it right back up and then go full throttle for the next 45 minutes. And then after the match, if they win or they lose, it doesn't matter. They actually take the time to clean up the stands so that the crew who works there doesn't have to do it. And again, that's something that you experience in sport, which talks about culture that you will never really have. So I think that's where that unexpected nature of sport is not just about who wins and loses. I think the unexpected nature of seeing how people interact with the things that they love through the lens of the sports that they love.
I love that. I love what you've said, Taylor. That's awesome. And this is actually a great way to transition into the question I want to pose to you, or the quote that I want to throw to you. Because what you're embodying in my mind is a curious mind. You know, your willingness to observe and learn by watching these fans and their reactions and their interactions in what is perhaps one of the longest standing rituals of humankind, the competition. So this quote comes from Brian Grazer. Grazer is quite famous in Hollywood, so Entertainment Connection, I think. Executive producer for Apollo 13 and many other quite well-known movies. He's written a book called A Curious Mind. And the quote that I wanted to share with you that I think is a good fit, it goes like this. It is perfectly true, as philosophers say, that life must be understood backwards. But they forget the other proposition, that it must be lived forwards. To me, I love this quote. There's just so much there, right?
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting because I think you can't chart life. If you gave me the chance to do a redo of what I've done since that semester at Sea Journey, like I don't think I would ever be on this path. But the ability to sort of now look backwards and see how it pieces together is just so true. And I once did a executive education course. It's something that I tried to continue with throughout my career, just because it helps to stimulate sort of your thinking and your skill set. And they asked, can you draw your life in a picture? And now I'm not an artist. It's another part of my brain, along with the language that I'm terrible at. But I am at least numeric. So I decided I'd draw like a graph, a line chart. And the interesting thing is you think about the things that you go on as you move forward is you are faced with a lot of ups and downs, this kind of ever going undulation of things that you're doing. And I think when you look at it in isolation, there are moments where you're down and you feel really down. And I've been around people, and I'm aware of instances, even in my own life, where I felt down, and it's tough, and it's something which is really serious. I think the ability to then blow out from that and look more macro to say, how's my overall trajectory? Is it up? And if it's not up, maybe I need to change something. But if it is up, at least you can then kind of distance yourself from those moments that are the down moments. And I think as I hear that quote from you, I think that thinking about living forward, like you need to always be living in that moment because each moment is very important. Because, like we talked about earlier, that kind of building your toolkit or arsenal, like every moment's a chance to build your toolkit. And so living forward allows you to do that. But if you're only living backwards and you're only thinking about the past and you're only trying to get to a certain destination and trying to chart how to get there, you're probably not going to ever get there because you're not building that capability set. And so I think
Yeah.
it actually is a very fitting quote to what we were talking about earlier. And so, yeah, no, it's great to hear that.
Yeah. So we every moment provides an opportunity that we can live into. And you've clearly done that in your career. You've lived in your moment. I love the idea that you drew a graph because as we live backwards, as we look backwards, right, we tend to draw a fairly straight line. This led to this, led to this, led to this, and here I am now. And as we know, honest reflection would show an up and down, an undulation, sometimes straight, sometimes crooked, sometimes the line actually went backwards and then back up. That's an honest reflection of how life actually unwinds. And your story yourself
Yeah.
really presents that in such an honest and authentic way. Hey, Taylor, this has been super fun. I would love it if you were willing at the end here, as we bring it to a close, do you have one piece of advice for young professionals? They've finishing college, they're maybe in their first job. You're way beyond that now, but you seem able to reflect back on that quite accurately. What's that one piece of advice you give to someone?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because everybody has to have their own sort of way of working, and you can't prescribe your way on somebody else. But I think there's probably three things in my own life that I always think about, which is commitment, and then like recovery, and then also expectations. And I think why I say those three is because from a like commitment perspective, I think I live as if like I just am fully invested and involved with everything I do. And I take it very to heart. And sometimes that's not the best thing. And I think I've heard that as feedback often when thinking about how much I put of myself into the things that I try to do and how do I try to drive change in the things that I'm sort of put in charge of or supporting, because it's not always that you're in charge. You have to be able to support as well as kind of lead from time to time. So I think commitment is one where you have to be able to always give your best. And if you take a day off, like I'm sure Michael Jordan never took a day off. And the reason he is who he is because he had the fortitude to just keep driving forward. I think recovery is the second one, which is maybe I'm lucky in this regard, and maybe like it's something that I was born with, but I somehow go to sleep and then wake up and then am able to just kind of have a fresh slate at it, like not holding too much. Like I go to sleep very upset and I might not sleep well and I probably like lose sleep. Like I'm not like saying, oh, look at me, I just drop into bed and I hit the pillow and I'm out. Like I'm actually someone who's constantly thinking and reflecting, probably even in my dreams. But I think once I recover, and usually that's something which I can do rapidly, being able to do that is something which I would expect and sort of recommend to sort of young listeners, because if you dwell on things, and they just bring you further and further into something, you're only going to move in that direction. Whereas if you can just figure out how to cope and create a mechanism for yourself to be able to do it, I think that that's really important. And then the third is expectations, which is we're all different and we all have different skills. And like we talked about earlier, like my skills are different than yours, Scott, which is different than people who you work with or interact with every day. And I think that you can't expect somebody else to do something the way that you do it. And I think it's about being able to be flexible to find what they're good at, as well as finding how you can then work with them to complement them. So that's where you might have to take on something a little bit different from what you were expecting in order to accommodate. And I think that's where good teamwork comes into play. So I'd say those are three things that maybe listeners can kind of take away and hopefully find value in.
Love it. Love it. Great stuff. Be committed, find your way to recover, and set appropriate expectations for yourself and those you work with. That's a great way to finish. Awesome. This has been so much fun.
Thank you,
Taylor.
Scott.
Congratulations on your newborn, the new addition to your family.
He didn't even cry during your podcast, thankfully.
Yeah. Lifting up dad already.
That's right.
Yeah. And congratulations on your career success. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Scott. And look forward to hopefully one day being a lifetime learner on Semester at Sea.
Let's do it.
All right.
This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program where students visit 10 countries on 3 continents, all while taking 3 to 4 college classes through Colorado State University. See course offerings and upcoming voyage itineraries at www.semesteratsea.org. Thank you for joining this week's episode of the As Unexpected podcast. The viewpoints and opinions of featured guests do not necessarily represent those of the Institute for Shipboard Education or Semester at Sea. Hit the like button, share it with your colleagues, family, and friends, and remember, be curious, be compassionate, be courageous. That's what it takes to lead as unexpected.